Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, The Basics of Project Management. My name is Kirsten Kay, and I'm a member of the America's Talent Management team, and I am here today with Colin, who is running our webinar and fielding all of our questions. On that note, I wanted to let you all know that we are going to be watching the questions box on the GoToWebinar toolbar. If you look at your GoToWebinar toolbar, there's a small section marked questions with a white triangle beside it. If you click on the white triangle, it expands the questions area, and you can type your questions in at any time throughout the webinar. Because I'm going to be covering quite a bit of information, I would love to be able to respond to your questions in real time to make sure nothing is confusing or that your questions get answered. So Colin Murphy is on the line, and he will be watching all those questions. He is going to interrupt periodically whenever the questions are coming in to read those questions to me and share the questions so that we can respond to them and then keep going with the webinar. In addition to that, in this webinar, we are going to use polling questions, a couple of polling questions. When those polling questions show up on your screen, the way in which you register your vote is to click on the answer that matches your choice. All right, with that, I'm going to get started. Again, today's topic is to cover the basics of project management. So I thought it was a perfect opportunity to start with the first poll. And this first poll is really asking the question, how much project management experience do you have? So the first selection is none. That's why I'm here. The second one is I've learned about it, but I've not applied it. Third response, I've worked on some projects, but perhaps you have been peripherally involved or not the manager. The fourth option is I have to manage a project coming up in the future. And then the last one is I have project managed, but I have no formal education on it. I can see that approximately 45% of the audience has voted. So we're just going to sit here for maybe 10 or 15 more seconds and allow each of you to register your votes. Okay, we're just at about 80% of people on the line have voted, so I am going to close this and I'm going to show you the response. So you can see on your screen 25% of the folks have said, I have no project management experience, that's why I'm here. A small amount said they've learned a little bit about it but not applied it. A solid 30% say I've worked on some projects, and another 31% say I've project managed some, but I have no formal education. And then 7 say upcoming, I have a project to manage. Wonderful. So on that note, it gives me good information about kind of where we're at and what the right tempo or speed for this webinar is, if you will. So I'm going to move in and just share with you the agenda. I am going to take you through a little bit of the high level, the history of project management. How did it get to be a discipline? We're going to talk a little bit about project management and the functions of project management. And then, as was described in this webinar, even though there are 6 project management functions, we're really just going to get into the initiate and analyze phase and the plan phases. And we're going to take a very high level overview look at this. So again, when it comes to project management, there are 6 elements. Every project gets initiated, which means people get together and talk about it and say, hey, we've got a project. The next thing that happens is an analysis of what is it that needs to be done, how is it going to be done, who's going to participate in doing it, what does the time frame look like, what kind of budgets are we talking about, what are the real goals and expectations from the key individuals involved, and then we sit down to create a formal plan. Beneath that, you go into executing that plan. You implement a series of controls to ensure that the plan happens at the right time, the right tasks, the right time, the right people on budget, etc. And then this last piece is called success. And what success is really about is doing a post-mortem of that project and gleaning all the elements that went really well, the things that maybe didn't go so well, but what you learned from the project, and writing it all up to ensure the next time a project like this happens, it's successful. So again, the top half of this picture, initiate, analyze, and plan, that's where we're going to spend our time talking today. Colin, I'm going to pause. Any questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, super. So let's get into a little bit of the history. People have been managing projects since the dawn of time. However, formal project management theory evolved in about the 1950s. So formal project management started being used in all the core engineering fields, so people who are building things, especially civil engineers, mechanical engineers, etc. I told Colin sometimes my computer does a funny thing during GoToWebinar, and you saw my screen flash there. I apologize for that. So in these core engineering fields, people started using project management, particularly this idea from Henry Gantt, which you may have heard of something like a Gantt chart. Henry Gantt is the person who put together all the ideas around how do we properly plan for our projects, and how do we put in place controls that ensure the plan is achieved at the right time with the right costs, etc. Then there's another gentleman, Henri Fayol, who really talked about those project management functions, which we saw on the previous screen, right? Those functions of initiate, analyze, plan, execute, control, and success. So folks have been talking about project management. They've been using it in the engineering field. So then what happened? A couple of major projects were happening. DuPont Corporation and Remington Rand Corporation were coming together to do work for the military, a lot of defense work. And they started to formalize their project management concepts, and they created a model called the critical path method. In this webinar, I am not going to go so deeply as to show you what the critical path method is. I assure you that if you were to take a formal project management class, you would get into the nitty-gritty. The next bullet really talks about what the critical path method is best for. So DuPont and Remington Rand realized that they were doing repeatable projects, known or determined activities. So they knew the timelines, everything was very concrete and practical, and this critical path method was a great tool to use. At the same time, the US Navy, Lockheed Corporation, and Booz Allen Hamilton were working on the Polaris missiles. And what they developed was a scheduling model called PERT, which stands for Program Evaluation and Review Technique. And you'll see the fancy word stochastic activities. This PERT model is especially useful when you're working on projects where there's multi-phases of activity that are operating separately from one another, and those timelines or tasks can be a bit uncertain or varied. For example, depending on the outcome of this first phase of work, we will either then go to the next phase A, B, or C, but it will be determined only after the first phase is completed. Then by 1969, in the United States, the Project Management Institute was formalized. So the Project Management Institute was formalized. They created a body of knowledge called the PMBOK, the PMBOK, as people will say it, Project Management Body of Knowledge Guidebook. I think we're on about the 7th edition of that. In addition to the Project Management Institute, they created certification courses and certification exams, and today people can be PMI certified. So that gives you a little bit of the background. The reason I lay all that out for you is because project management is a discipline and a rigor. And what you'll find when you study project management is it's very concretely defined. However, in our daily lives, we may take our knowledge of project management and use it in more basic or simplified ways. For example, I might work on a project like the intern program. I might use my project management knowledge and skill set to run it, but it's not the same level of difficulty as the Polaris missile project. So let's move into what I called these project management functions. We saw those 5. What is the initiating step? The initiating step is all about identifying the project goal, gathering all the information that we need in order to make the well-informed plan. Step 2 is getting buy-in from all the parties involved, especially stakeholders. What are stakeholders? Stakeholders are people with a vested interest in the project. So there's a difference between the executive sponsor or the project sponsor. The sponsor is the person who has the goal. The sponsor is the person who needs the work of the project done. Stakeholders, though, are peripheral groups of people or teams that will be impacted by this project or will participate in this project. So again, if I'm a project manager and someone has come to me and given me a project, one of the very first things I need to do is sit down, have deep conversations with that sponsor to say, help me really understand the goal. What is it we're trying to achieve? Why are we looking to achieve it? What's the business need? What's the rationale? Are there any constraints that we know about? Asking all these questions. And the next piece is I would then go have conversations with all of the stakeholders in advance of creating the plan to ask them, what does this mean for your group? How can your group contribute? How will your group be impacted? Are there any constraints I should know about, etc. Once we get through that initiating and analyzing portion, we would sit down to try to make the first plan. And the planning phase is sort of iterative. In the world of project management, you'll see we have planning, executing, and on the next slide, we see there's closing. If we were to use some very rough math, approximately 65% of my time will be spent initiating and planning. Then another 30% of my time would be spent executing and controlling. And then the very last 5% of my time would be spent evaluating and writing up for future success. In reality, at work, we know that we tend to do virtually no planning or discussing. We tend to jump right into our work and start executing, and then while we're executing, things sometimes go a little sideways. And we end up creating plans to fix things instead of creating plans up front. So again, I want to back us up. The discipline of project management, the rigor of project management, is to spend a great deal of time understanding the project needs and making the plans, and then going into executing. The way in which you actually do it sometimes may be different. So what happens in the planning phase? We create plans for every single aspect of the work. And when I say every single aspect of the work, a plan will define a task. The task needs to be defined in a very detailed way. The name of the task, how much time will that task take, how many people are needed to do the task, what other additional resources might be needed. It might be a conference room, it could be materials, etc. In my plan, I might also have things that I call milestones, and those milestones are critical gates or dates, deadlines that I want to arrive at for successful progress in my plan. During my planning phase, I also want to look at all the work, all the tasks, and I want to ask, what about risk? What could go wrong? For example, maybe I'm working on a project, maybe I'm remodeling my kitchen, and I've ordered some cupboards from a supplier in Pennsylvania. And I know that those cupboards are supposed to be delivered, let's see, in 2 weeks' time. So let's say they're going to be delivered on September 24th. But lo and behold, there's a strike, or there's weather, or there's something, and it causes those cupboards to arrive late. The very prospect of cupboards arriving late will have an impact on my plan. So that's identifying potential risk. I can decide if the risk is likely to happen, or a high likelihood, a medium likelihood, or a low likelihood. And every time I identify risk that has a high or medium likelihood, I should have some other contingency plans. Those contingency plans are in my back pocket, and I'll use them while I'm executing the plan to control the plan to make sure we don't go too far off schedule. Which brings me to executing. Once the plan has been fully determined, we start to implement the plan. When we're implementing the plan, we're using the plan as our work list, as our to-do list. Everyone knows what's happening at what time frames. At the same time, we track all of that activity. And we start to look at variances. Variances are any time the work and the plan don't match. So when we track activity, we want to track what's going exactly according to plan and what is varying from the plan. Why? Because those variances will inform us about future projects, and they'll help us plan more successfully in the future. Those variances might be caused by risk. They might be caused by other things. One of the best ways to control the variances, though, is to be watching my project plan on a daily and weekly basis, and also having those contingency plans ready to activate in the event I hit a stumbling block. So that second bullet under executing is I'm going to adjust that plan as needed on the fly to ensure that those outcomes are aligned with the project. Again, I'm going to pause to see if there's any questions.
Kirsten, at this time, the only questions that we're receiving are primarily just making sure that people can get a copy of the recording after. So yes, the presentation will be available. It'll be on our benefits website, rewards@3ds.com, and I expect it'll be up by end of day Friday at the latest.
Perfect. Thank you, Colin. Okay, so 2 more steps. And so again, we're calling all these the project management functions. The next step is controlling. I think in some groups we're very, very accustomed to having monitor and controls, and in other areas we're less accustomed to doing this. Again, it's a part of the formal project management rigor to define the controls for any given project, then to monitor and invoke those controls. The controls exist for a very simple reason: to protect or optimize the costs, the money, the budget. So typically, project managers are very good at knowing what the controls are and being able to step in and invoke those controls as needed. The last piece then, as I talked about, is just closing up. And again, you know, sometimes we skip this because once the work is done, we're moving right on to the next thing. In formal project management, what we want to do is be able to report on all elements of the project, excuse me. I want to be able to share all the budgeting information. I want to be able to share the original plan as well as what we actually did, all of the real-time activity reporting and the variance. I want to meet with that whole project team to conduct a post-mortem. And what a post-mortem is a look back at the project and an opportunity to identify all the aspects of the project that went well and according to plan, and to take a look back and identify all of the elements of the project that did not go according to plan or did not go well. And it's not just to keep a list of what didn't work, it's to identify what we could have done or what should be done next time. Documenting all that and keeping it for future use. In companies that have a project management office or a formal function called the PMO, the project management office keeps on file every single closeout report from every single project, so that when a team endeavors to work on a new project, they can go in and use those resources just like a library, and they can pull that, and then what they would do is they would pull those old projects in the initiating phase of the next project. All right, so let's take a deeper dive into the initiate and analyze phase. I've pulled up for you the RACI model, and in Dassault Systems, we have a tendency to use the RACI model, or we use the RACI model. We add an S into this, so it would be RASCI. let me take you through what it is. This is a model that can be used for everything to decide who's the responsible person for the task. Responsible meaning the person actually completing the work. The accountable person, who's the person with the decision-making authority. In some cases, they're different. In some cases, it could be the same person. The C is the consult. These are key stakeholders or even the sponsor who really should be included in the decision or the work activity. And lastly, it's is inform. Who needs to know about decisions or actions? Inform is typically other stakeholder groups or constituents that are the recipients of the project work, but that are not involved in the project themselves. At Dassault Systems, if you see RASCI, the S stands for support. And support would be people who are not formally a part of the project, but that will support the work when the work is in their key areas. So again, this is a model, and these are exactly the kinds of questions I would use in the very beginning when I meet with my sponsor and I'm asking my sponsor all about what is the goal, what is the work, what is it we're really setting out to do. I want to know the responsible, accountable, consult, and inform for the goal, for each phase of work, for the tasks, etc. I want as much detail around this as I possibly can. Why? Because when I'm executing the plan, and I'm in the process of executing everything, when something goes wrong, the faster I can get to the person who's responsible, accountable, who to consult or who to inform with the information, the faster I'm going to have a remedy and the faster I'm going to be able to implement that fix to keep my project on schedule. That's why I care about this stuff. So then,
Kirsten?
Yes, please.
We just had a question, and how would you differentiate between a project and a product?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to take it one step further if I can. I'm going to differentiate between a project, a program, and a product. Okay, a project is a cycle of work that satisfies one goal or one outcome. A project, furthermore, is not repeatable or operational activity. It's a new or unique activity. A program is a collection of projects that are all satisfying one outcome. A product is something we're seeking to create, and a product could have some elements of it that are known, repeatable, and therefore considered operational activity. A product could have new features or enhancements for which there would be a project team working on it. But if a product, for example, had 4 new features or 4 new enhancements, I would expect to see 4 project teams, 1 for each, unless those new features and enhancements were all really the part of the same one feature or enhancement set. I'm pausing to see if someone comes back with requiring more information about that, just chime in again. Okay, I'm going to move on. So I'm still in that initiate and analyze phase. One of the very, very first things I need to do is I need to work with my sponsor and my stakeholders to get a clear definition around these 3 items. The scope. The scope is the work that's going to be done. It's the what. What are we doing? How is it being done? And part of what's embedded in the scope is the quality. How well? For example, in my product explanation, we might be looking to create a new enhancement. The scope will define the features, the functionality, any GUI components. It's everything to do with the work and the high level of quality around the work. The next piece is the schedule. The schedule is the time frame. During what period of time are we going to execute the scope or all of the tasks? The last piece is called resources. In some other contexts, people might refer to it as budget. People might refer to it as costs. I like to use the word resources because it reminds me it's money and people and materials and it's every resource I might need. And if you think about it, every resource does cost us money. Whether it's people's time, whether it's materials we have to purchase, etc. But again, I like to keep the word resources because resources is every person, every material, every site I might need, etc. So it's everything that's going to get factored into my budget. If you prefer, you can call this scope, schedule, budget. But the bottom line is you want to get full exhaustive definitions around this. But here's where project management becomes hard. In my mind, being a project manager is, quite frankly, one of the hardest jobs anyone will endeavor to do. Why? Because in my preliminary conversations, I'm going to ask my sponsor and my stakeholders to help me define these elements. But project management theory teaches me that it's only when I've defined all the tasks and how much time every task takes that I really know what the schedule is. And furthermore, when I endeavor to do all those tasks, they're going to cost a certain amount of money. But in the real world, when we step up to lead a project, we're given the what to do, the scope. We're told how much time we have. We're given a deadline. And we're told how much what resources we have, how much money we have, etc. So we go into it with our constraints in place. And when you try to constrain all of these things, you will not be successful. So very, very experienced project managers know that the next conversation is critical. And the next conversation is the project priority matrix. You'll see we have two axes here. On the one axis, you have constrain, enhance, accept. Constrain is defined as we will not deviate from the plan at all, ever. The second aspect here is enhance. Enhance is like optimizing. I'm going to look for no more than 10 or 15% deviation from our plan. The third is accept, and accept means just that. I'll accept whatever deviation from the plan comes. On the opposite axis, you have the time, the schedule. You have performance or the scope. It's the what you're trying to accomplish and the quality of that thing. And lastly, you have the cost, the resources, the budget, the materials, etc. When we sit down with an empty priority matrix with our project sponsor, we're going to say to them, I can only constrain one of these three things. I can seek to optimize the second thing, which is 10 to 15% deviation from our plan. But the third thing I'm going to have to accept. And why do I have to accept it? Because when my project is not going according to plan, and I promise you, no project has gone 100% to plan in the lifespan of mankind. So when I'm a project manager and I'm managing a project and I'm in the phase of executing, when the plan starts to go a little sideways, I need to know where I can make choices, where I can make decisions. So in the example I've given you, let's say it's a new product we're releasing. The scope or the performance is what's been completely constrained. As a company, we have decided that no matter what, we want to create this product with all the features and functionalities that we've defined, and we want it to be of the quality we've defined. We will not budge on that. What we're optimizing or enhancing is how quickly we get this done, because it's part of our go-to-market strategy, and it's going to help us with our revenue projections, etc. So in order to get this product launched, I want to make sure I minimize 10 to 15% variance in terms of the time frame in which we do this. So then I have to accept the costs. Because if we are behind schedule, I might want to hire more people to work on it. I may want to buy additional materials or resources. I'm going to spend money, and project managers will talk about throwing money at the problem, right? Without this project priority matrix, I might go into this trying to constrain everything, trying to deliver this super high quality product on exactly the time frame that's been given to me, on exactly the budget that's been given to me. And if I do try to constrain all of them, I'm going to fail. So again, in those early initializing and analyzing phases, I want to have this conversation. I want to make sure the sponsor really clearly understands that we cannot constrain all three, that we can choose to enhance or optimize one, but that we have to pick which one can be accepted. In modern corporate reality, we tend to constrain either time or cost. We tend to enhance the other one, time or cost, and we tend to accept on performance or scope. We tend to leave off a feature or give up a functionality or not fix a bug in the next cycle or what have you. Again, I'm going to pause.
Kirsten, I think we can address the questions that have come up at the end.
Oh, okay, super. I'll keep going. All right. So again, I'm going to go back here for a second. I'm in these initiate, analyze phases. Now we're going to walk over to plan. I'm getting together this document called a project charter. My project charter is going to have the name of our project. It's going to have all of our opportunity statements, and you've got a laundry list here. This is one of the real resources or references I've embedded into this PowerPoint for you. What's the problem? What's at stake? If we don't do something about it, what would be missed? Why are these things a problem? Who's impacted? Where or when is the problem felt? How much do we know about the problem? How much of a problem do we have? How big of it is it, etc. And then we start to build out the business case. Income considerations, things, cost savings or efficiencies, whose impact, how are they impacted, etc. We're thinking about our goal statements. We're then able to define what's in scope on the project and what's out of scope on the project. You absolutely want to have out of scope written out here because you've all heard the phrase scope creep, right? Stakeholders and sponsors get excited about the potentials of the project, and they tend to try to add more and more and more in after the preliminary discussions. A good project manager has a backbone and is a gatekeeper. And a good project manager will say to the sponsor and the stakeholders, if you want to add these out of scope elements in, we're going to have to go back and redo the project charter. You'll notice a project plan eventually gets created and the project team gets identified. The project team can be those RACI people, etc. One other element that's not visible to you here, and again, I've learned this over time, I like to build into my project charter a section called assumptions. Assumptions are the assumptions I'm making as the project manager. The assumption is that the 3 people from IT will be made available to me in weeks 13 and 40 when I need them. Another assumption is that the first phase of the project will be executed exactly on time to allow for the second phase to kick off. Another assumption could be that we'll get the key funding that we're waiting on, etc. So you want to put those assumptions in because those assumptions then create an opportunity. If a sponsor or a stakeholder says, why is the project not performing as we expected it? You can point back and say, when we made the plan, we had these assumptions and we've nullified, right? It's been determined we didn't get the funding or we didn't get the resources, what have you. Okay, so now we're moving into the creation of the full plan. You've got a goal statement.
Hey, Kirsten.
Yes, please.
Kirsten, before you move on, a question had come up regarding that project charter that you've shown. And the question was, is that project charter that you're showing, is that a defined project charter that Dassault Systems uses or currently uses? I'm guessing perhaps there may be a different version that a person has seen or has been using.
Absolutely. That's a great question. This is a generic example. I know that in different groups in our organization, particularly services, they are going to have their own very specific tools, especially because they're project managing internally and externally with our customers. If you endeavor to take some of our project management courses, you might be given different samples of project charters. You as a working team might endeavor to make your own template. So this is just an example. Thank you for clarifying. All right, I will move on. So now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of planning. I've got the goal statement. I know the expectation of scope, schedule, and resources. Now I'm going to start to think about work as phases of work, but I want to take a bottom-up approach to my planning as opposed to a top-down. What do I mean by that? What I want to think about is what's all the tasks that need to be done. A lot of times we tend to think of work as, let's say, I'm going to go back to my kitchen remodeling example. I'm going to remodel my kitchen, and somebody might call my project plan, remodel your kitchen. And I'll say, okay, yeah, that's my goal. I'm going to remodel the kitchen. So then somebody would say, well, what are the phases? And I'd say, well, we need to demolish the kitchen. We need to rebuild the kitchen. Well, in actuality, when you really start to think about the work in very, very minute ways, you'll realize you need to talk to an architect. You need to decide what you want your new kitchen to look like. You need to define your budget, order materials. You need to do all these things. So what I like to do to make sure I get every single solitary detail captured is I like to break it down to the task level. One task, now somebody might say, oh, a task is that you need to order all the materials to do your kitchen. And I'm going to argue with you that that's a phase of work. A task is ordering the granite counters from this person. Another task is ordering the cabinets from that person. Furthermore, how do you know what granite countertops to order? A task would be measuring the countertops. Another task would be selecting the granite you want to use. Or first you might say, I'm going to select my vendor. Then I'm going to select my granite. Then I'm going to do the measure. Then I'm going to approve the order. Then I'm going to sign the invoice. Then I'm going to finalize the order. All of those tiny little pieces are your actual tasks. Why do you need to drill down to those tiny little tasks? Because the only way to estimate how much time it takes to order new countertops for your kitchen is to be able to break it down into every minute little step and determine how much time each step would take. So for example, if I'm going to pick a vendor, well, did I skip the step of identifying my possible vendors? How much time do I want to give myself to investigate each vendor or to talk to each vendor? I might decide that vendor selection is a phase. I might give myself 3 days to identify vendors and vet vendors. I might create a milestone, a deadline, that by Thursday of the week I need to select a vendor. Then I need to meet with that vendor to review materials. I might give myself 2 days to select materials and then select another milestone as my deadline for picking a material, etc. And this is why I go back and I say that project management is this incredible discipline and rigor, because the folks who are full-time permanent project managers, they look at everything this descriptively. They apply this much discipline and rigor. And it's important because the only way I can estimate how much time anything will take is if I look at every last little detail and factor in how much time it usually takes, or I think it's going to take. How much money will that be? Suppose I am painting a room and the room is 20 feet by 10 feet. And I know that if I have one person, it will take them 4 days to paint that room. And when I say paint that room, I mean first go in and do, I'm losing my words here. You're going to prime the walls. Then you're going to put the first coat of paint on. Then you're going to put the second coat of paint on. And then you're going to be done. Maybe you'll spot check it. So to paint the room, I'd want to have how much time it takes to prime the walls, how much time it takes to put the first coat of paint on, how much time it takes the second coat of paint on, and how much time it takes to evaluate. If it takes one person 2 days to paint the prime coat, paint the first coat, paint the second coat, then I know that one person is going to take me 6 days. Oh, and P.S., paint has to dry. So I can't rush it, right? Suppose it takes that person 16 hours to paint the primer coat. I can't begin painting the first coat at hour 17 because I'm going to need to wait 8 hours for the room to dry. So how will I compress my schedule? Well, I could put 4 people in that room to paint, and then I'm using only half a day. Then I'm giving it 8 hours to dry. I'm using a half a day to paint the first coat, 8 hours to dry, and so on. So getting into this level of detail is really important, and it's the stuff that differentiates well planned out projects from poorly planned out projects. So once I have my tasks, I know what the work is. I know how much time that, or the durations for each task. I also know how many resources I have. In the example I gave you where I said painting a room takes one person 16 hours or it takes 4 people 4 hours, that's great because I could use resources to decrease the duration of the time, but it's going to take 8 hours to dry for the paint to dry. It doesn't matter how many people you put in the room. It's still going to take 8 hours. So another thing a project manager needs to know is which durations can be decreased with more resources and which durations cannot be decreased with more resources. And this gets back to the whole, I can throw money at tasks that are taking too long to decrease them. So I've defined all the tasks. I know in great detail what they are. Then I start to roll up the tasks. All tasks that work together to satisfy one portion of the work would then be considered a phase of the work. And then there are multiple phases of the work that then eventually roll up to satisfy the goal. I want to be able to get to a point where I have exhaustively explained that. So in this particular example, we know that we want to clean a room, and the clean of the room listed as 0.0 is the goal. Beneath that, we have 5 phases: mopping the floor, dusting, vacuuming, etc. 1.0 is one phase, 2.0 is the next, 3.0, etc. Beneath each phase, I have done a good job of deciding what the tasks are and in the order that the tasks must be done. The only thing that I've left out here is what is the time duration for each of these actual tasks. So when it says 1.1 or 1.2, that's a real task. And the task should have not only the name get, mop, and bucket out, it should have 10 minutes and a person's name. So this idea of laying out my project in a numbered fashion, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, then 2, 2.1, 2.2, etc. This is called a work breakdown structure, or a WBS. And when all of the planning has been finalized, a project manager will list every single task in the project in this kind of bulleted, indented, bulleted way, so that on quick glance, one can see the goal, the phases of work, the tasks that are required to complete each phase of work. You even see some places where there are subtasks. So you have 4.0, pick up floor, 4.1, toys, 4.1.1, put toys in box. So this kind of level of detail is what a project manager will utilize. The project manager will then look across the whole thing and say, I would like to shorten the duration of my project can I do any of these things simultaneously? Can I mop the floor while I dust, or while I vacuum, or while I pick up? Or quite frankly, when I look at this, maybe it doesn't make any sense. I've thought about the discrete activities of picking up the floor and vacuuming and dusting, but they're not logically in the right order. In fact, what I want to do is pick up the room first. Then I want to dust, then I want to vacuum, then I want to mop, and so on. But the compartmentalizing of the tasks in this kind of a work breakdown structure is the first place a project manager will start to make sure all of the work is being organized in the right way. And then this work breakdown structure is a way that everyone who's involved in the project knows the sequencing of work or the dependencies of tasks. I'm going to pause again.
We do have a few questions, and we'll start with, at which point do you need to have your resource plan ready?
The resource plan being the budget, the money, the people, the materials, etc. Again, if you ask a project management certified person, they will tell you that after determining all the work, you will have a sense of how much resources are needed. It's only through a thorough investigation of what the work is that you'll know what materials or people or money you need. However, in our world, we tend to be given a particular budget, or we tend to be given particular resources. So if that is our real life case, then when I'm project managing, I want to be able to go back to my sponsors and stakeholders while I'm working on the plan to alert them to times where I don't have enough resources. I don't have enough people, I don't have enough materials, I don't have enough money, and ask them to start to make decisions. And those decisions could be to give me more or to take something out of the scope.
Okay. And with the planning exercise, is it typically done in conjunction with stakeholders and subject matters as well, i.e. the people you identify to consult with? Project managers themselves don't always have the expertise to figure these types of things out.
Absolutely. And that's why that initial phase of going and talking to everyone, if I was trying to think through all the work involved in a particular stream of work, I might go and sit with the stakeholders for that stream of work and say, but I would interview them, right? I wouldn't let my plan be dependent on how critically they think about their work. I would be the one helping them critically think about the work and documenting it. I would just be asking them for all the input. So I might pose to them, can you pick up the floor and vacuum at the same time? What would the impact be? You know what I mean? I'll be the critical thinker to capture all the right responses.
Okay, and one more in this area. What if you don't always know what the subtasks are for each goal or project or task? If you don't have enough idea about the project and you're going to miss on some of this, does this happen often? And how do you manage in that case? Absolutely,
it could. I think it's a really smart question, and I think it's a function of finding subject matter experts and the stakeholders who do really deeply know how that work is done, and asking them enough questions to help you flush out what those tasks and subtasks should be.
Okay, that's it for now.
Awesome. We're coming up on the hour, so I'm gonna move through. As I said to you, the next thing you would do, you would define these tasks. You would then estimate time and resources. So for everything that looks like a .1 or a .1.1, so I would estimate rinsing out the bucket and mop. I would estimate time and resources for mixing the cleaner and water. I would estimate getting the mop and bucket out. Then what I would do is I would add those estimates together, and what would end up being assigned to the 1.0 mop floor would be the sum of the time and resources of the subtasks. So I'm not endeavoring to estimate how much time and resources it would take to mop the floor. I'm doing such a good job of defining the subtask, right? These individual tasks or subtask levels, that when I sum them to the 1.0 level, I arrive at the conclusion of how much time and resources that phase will take. Furthermore, I can start to think about task dependencies, which is what I just talked to you about, which is, can I do these in this order? Should they be done in a different order? Is the order meaningful? For example, if I'm trying to use the same person to pick up the floor and dust, then I can't let pick up the floor and dust happen at the same time. But if I have two different people, why couldn't I have one person picking up the floor and one person dusting? Because then their time would overlap and I'd get to use less time in total duration. So I want to think through dependencies. Is there a relationship between the work? For example, why would I mop the floor before I vacuumed? Let's say I'm going to vacuum the hardwood. I'd want to sweep or vacuum it first before I'd want to mop it. That has a relationship there, and I want to think all that through as well. So the last piece is I'm going to step back to that idea of schedule, budget, and resources. If I've applied project management theory the way it's defined by the PMI organization, I would have been given a scope, and I would then fully define the plan, and the plan would tell me what the schedule is going to be based on task durations. The plan would tell me what my resource needs are, and consequently what my budget needs are. Again, we don't work in that perfect world, but the planning phase is the time that a project manager has to either validate or invalidate the schedule and the resources they've been given. So I don't want to be the kind of project manager who says, well, I don't have any choice anyway. I have to do it in this time frame with these resources. Like it or not, I just have to figure out how to get it done. I have an opportunity, if it's grossly out of line, to go back to my sponsor and say, it doesn't add up. I've done my work here and it doesn't add up. We're going to need to review this because we won't get it all done in time, or we won't get it all done with that budget. So the next piece we're looking at is, you know, again, a recap. We talked about initiate, we talked about analyze, we talked about plan. I did sort of gloss over execute, control, and success, and that's something you can look at in a future session. I had an hour, so I did the best I could with that hour. So let's do this next poll. Now that we've run through this webinar, I'm going to say, now that you've had some exposure to project management, what do you think you're going to do next? So your next step could be nothing right now. I'm good. I was interested in learning about project management, and I got some information. Another person could say, you know what, I know we have the 3DS portal to lynda.com, and I'm going to want to go to that portal and take some classes. Someone else might think, I really appreciate instructor-led in-person classes, so I'm going to go to the 3DS University and I'm going to look for some of those classes because I know we offer them. And lastly, somebody might think, you know, this is for me. I love all this attention to detail. I really want to take up project management. I'm going to pursue my certification. We've got about 40% people voting right now. I'm going to give you another 10 or 15 seconds to get the votes in. Got about 60% voted. Like to get us up to 80% voted. Okay, we're holding steady, so I'm going to close the poll. I'm going to show you the results. So 36% say nothing right now, and that's okay. The purpose of these webinars were to be informational and informative. And then a pretty even mix between folks who like the idea of going to lynda.com or going to the 3DS University to look for some classes. And 13% say I'm going to pursue my certification. Bravo. PMI certification is a major accomplishment, and you know, one that is hard to earn and very well respected. So I congratulate you in that effort. I'm going to hide this. Oh, I bounced out of my, there we go. So here's the last step. Oh, do you have a question, Colin?
No, go ahead, and then I'll go to some
Okay,
questions.
so I want to leave you with this. Inside our company, we do use project management, especially for our services roles. In fact, the PMI certification is a requirement for key services roles. So for those of you on the call who are not a part of the services organization and are wondering about your long-term career mobility, if project management is something you're very interested in and very good at, perhaps you want to start to think about services roles. For folks who want to go to the lynda.com portal, 3DS does have a lynda.com portal, and you can search the term project management for all sorts of content. If you're having trouble finding the 3DS lynda.com portal, please send an email to NAM Talent Management. We also offer classroom training through the 3DS University. We offer project management fundamentals. We offer advanced, and then we also offer a refresher course that gets folks ready for certification. With that, we have come to the end of, I'm at 3 o'clock on the nose, but let's hear the rest of the questions.
Okay. So I suppose just to start with, an employee asked if we're going to it's SAFE or SAFE project management, if you're familiar with that.
I am. For folks who have heard about SAFE or SAFE training is a requirement for our Boeing contracts. For folks who are affiliated or working on Boeing, yes, SAFE is going to be a requirement.
Okay. And now we'll go back to some of the questions that I think are just more broadly based. When I involve a person who is accountable together with the person responsible for the work, doesn't it look like it's an escalation of an issue? And if so, what would you recommend as proper etiquette?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I like to, this is me and my own personal sentiment, I like to believe that it's not so much what we say or what we do, it's how we do it. I think sometimes when we behave in a manner that brings urgency or alarm to a situation, it can feel like an escalation. I think that, so a couple of things. I think the way in which your demeanor has something to do with it, or the words you choose if you're writing an email. The second thing I think is, if you never go back to the responsible and accountables and you only go back to them once in a blue moon when there's a fire drill or something's on fire, then they're going to start to feel like it's an urgent, important, or escalation when it happens. If it's a routine part of running the project that you check in with them on a regular basis and you're elevating to their attention all sorts of project-related things that are important, I think it can diminish that feel of it's being escalated or what have you. So I think that's a little bit of finesse too.
Okay, and staying here on the RACI model, how do you manage people who disagree with either their involvement or their place within the RACI chart, especially if the sponsor does not have full buy-in from other parts of the organization?
So in this particular instance, and I'm going to go to what I think is the root of the question, which is authority. A project manager at the end of the day doesn't have any authority. The sponsor is the person who has the authority to create the project, allocate the budget, therefore allocating the people, the resources, what have you. So, you know, the old expression about having skin in the game. The project manager wants to make sure that any project that is fully funded and approved is done well. But if a project is failing to get approval or funding, that's not the project manager's concern. Unless it's your own project, right? That brings a whole different spin on it, but at any rate.
And this is more of a comment than anything else, but just something for us to think about, that this employee was saying that it would be great if we can do a series on this topic as opposed to just this one introductory class. And that may actually lead into a follow-up question, or not a follow-up question, but an additional question, and that is, where we do have project management classes, that are offered by DS. Who does that? Who does the teaching of those classroom trainings?
The classroom trainings are taught by AMA instructors, and we have used the same few AMA instructors for years now. We also have another portal that is called Skillport. Licenses or username passwords are given on a case-by-case basis, and Skillport is another portal that helps people do exam preparation to help them earn their certification.
Okay. And this last question, I will ask it, but I'm not positive that you're going to be able to answer it. And that is, it seems like there is no PMO within Dassault Systems, or at least within some R&D brands
Right.
that don't have it. Do you know why that is?
I don't. I have asked the question. I don't have a clear or specific answer. At the same time, there are lots of different ways to project manage, and some groups are using Agile and Scrum methodologies as opposed to so I've gone through and given you very classic project management methodologies as prescribed by PMI. So part of the reason why we don't have a PMO could have something to do with the fact that we do employ multiple different project management philosophies. Or we give people latitude to use the ones that work best for them.
And just somebody else followed up and said that within services there is PMO.
Perfect. Thank you.
Again, depending on your group, that may or may not be the case. But that actually wrapped up the number of questions that we had today. Fabulous.
Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the extra 5 or 7 minutes that we spent on the line. There's one more talent management webinar that's coming as a part of this rewards comp and benefits series, and I believe that we will tack on to this idea of project management, getting into a little more detail in a different aspect of it. So again, thank you for your time. Colin, thank you for having me.
No, thank you for presenting to us today, and thank you all for joining today. Thank you very much.
Bye.